The hospital's white walls carried a heavy silence that felt colder than the air conditioning. The beeping of monitors, the hurried footsteps of nurses, and the faint cries from distant rooms blended into a background soundtrack of worry and hope. In a corner of the waiting area, Emma Lewis sat with her hands trembling, a pen clutched tightly between her fingers. The paper in front of her was simple, just a standard consent form for her daughter's surgery. Yet it felt like the heaviest thing she had ever been asked to sign. Her daughter, Lily, only 8 years old, was lying unconscious in a hospital bed after collapsing suddenly at school. The doctors had explained that she needed immediate surgery, that time was slipping through their fingers, and that without Emma's signature, they couldn't move forward. Emma's heart felt like it was being squeezed in a vice. She was a single mom, working 2 jobs, barely making ends meet. Her ex-husband had walked out years ago, leaving her with nothing but overdue bills and a toddler clinging to her leg. Emma had grown used to handling things alone, telling herself she was strong enough, even when she cried herself to sleep at night. But this moment, this impossible moment, made her feel like she was drowning. Her hand hovered above the paper, her tears dripping onto the ink lines. What if something went wrong? What if she lost the only person in this world who gave her life meaning? Signing the paper meant handing Lily's fragile life over to strangers in white coats, trusting them with everything she had. Emma closed her eyes, whispering a prayer under her breath, when suddenly the sound of hurried shoes echoed down the hallway. A man's voice, deep and commanding yet strangely filled with urgency, called out her name. Emma. She froze. She hadn't expected anyone to come for her. When she lifted her head, she saw him, a tall man in a tailored suit, his presence radiating authority that made even the nurses step aside. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, as though he had rushed straight from an important meeting. His name was Ethan Cole, the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company, a man she knew only from news articles, charity events, and whispered admiration from her coworkers. Yet here he was, in her hospital corridor, his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her chest tighten. "She's not alone," Ethan said firmly, placing a steadying hand on Emma's shoulder before she could speak. His words cut through the fear clouding her mind. Emma blinked, confused. "Why are you here? How do you?" Ethan didn't answer right away. Instead, he crouched beside her, gently guiding the pen back into her trembling hand. "You don't have to do this by yourself. I'll be right here. Whatever Lily needs, whatever you need, I'll make sure it's taken care of." Tears blurred Emma's vision. I don't understand. Why would you help us?" Ethan's gaze softened, his usually sharp features revealing something more human, more vulnerable. "Because years ago, I was that child in the hospital bed. And someone signed the papers for me when my own father refused to. A stranger saved my life. I swore if I ever had the chance to be that stranger for someone else, I would never walk away." Emma's lips parted, her voice breaking. "But, you don't even know us." "I don't need to," Ethan replied. "I see a mother fighting for her child. That's enough." The room seemed to hold its breath. Emma finally pressed the pen to the paper and signed her name. The doctors hurried off with the consent form, but Emma remained frozen, staring at Ethan like he was some impossible apparition who had walked into her nightmare to hold back the darkness. Hours later, Emma found herself pacing outside the operating room. Every second felt like a year. Ethan stayed beside her, his jacket draped over her shoulders when he noticed her shivering. He didn't speak much, just stayed, his presence a silent anchor against the tide of her fear. When the surgeon finally emerged, pulling off his mask, Emma nearly collapsed with relief at the words. The surgery was successful. "She's going to be okay." Emma covered her face, sobbing openly, and Ethan caught her before she fell. She had never let anyone hold her like that since her ex left, but in that moment, she didn't care. She was just a mother who had been given back her daughter. Over the next days, Ethan didn't vanish the way most strangers would. He brought meals, covered the hospital bills before Emma could even argue, and sat with Lily as she healed, telling her funny stories that made her laugh through the pain. Emma couldn't deny the spark of warmth that spread through her chest every time she saw him by her daughter's bedside, holding her tiny hand like it was the most important thing in the world. But it wasn't just money or influence that made Ethan different. It was the way he listened to Emma when she spoke about her struggles, the way he treated her not as someone to be pitied but as someone strong, someone who had carried more than her fair share of burdens. Slowly, Emma began to see him not as the powerful CEO the world admired, but as a man with scars of his own, choosing kindness because he knew what it felt like to be abandoned. Lily recovered faster than the doctors expected, her spirit lifting with every visit from Ethan. And one evening, as Emma watched her daughter asleep in the hospital bed, she turned to Ethan with tears in her eyes. "You've done so much for us," she whispered. "I don't even know how to thank you." Ethan smiled faintly, his gaze resting on Lily. "You don't have to thank me. Just promise me one thing. Never believe you're alone again. Because you're not." Emma's heart swelled, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe those words. What began as a terrifying night in a sterile hospital grew into something unexpected, a bond between three people who, against all odds, found each other in the darkest hour. And though Emma had walked into that hospital as a single mother carrying the world on her shoulders, she walked out with something she had thought she'd lost forever: hope, kindness, and the knowledge that sometimes humanity reveals its brightest light when we least expect it. The CEO's words would echo in her heart forever: "She's not alone."